Speaking of that evidence, just a few minutes ago up in the media room, something rather unprecedented occurred. Ted Bundy had agreed to do an interview with me over the telephone. He called me while we were talking on this interview. In this courtroom, Judge Edward Cowart came in to answer some questions that the jurors had. We were able to relay to Bundy what the judge was saying.
Ted, it doesn't appear to be anything significant at this point. What is happening right now?
The jury has asked a question about testimony, certain evidence from police.
The jury has asked a question, Ted, about some testimony, and the judge is going to provide that. About
Deputy Marion Kirkham.
About Deputy Marion Kirkham. Do you have any idea what that's about?
Marion Kirkham, I have. Oh, yes, indeed. Well, that could be with regard to... Marion Kirkham was the crime scene technician who processed the Dunwoody crime scene, and she was responsible, one, for collecting the linen from Cheryl Thomas's bed, and two, for collecting the pantyhose mask. And she also stretched it out on the floor to take a photograph of the mask. Our contention has been that possibly the hair found on the mask was picked up off the floor. And then a few minutes ago I talked to one of my attorneys, and he was telling me what the jury was doing, which is, from what we can tell, very little. And I started to get a little bit edgy. I said, well, why aren't they looking at exhibits, and how late are they going to go? Someone said that Judge Cowart had predicted they'll be back tonight. I wanted to know why he thought that was going to be the case, and so on and so forth. So I just said, I just decided to put it out of my mind, and I'll tell you what, whatever happens, I'm ready for it.
Are you prepared for a guilty verdict?
Sure thing. I mean, yes, I am, believe it or not. In a way, I just want to get this over so I can catch up on my sleep, and that may sound kind of funny, but the pressure of being in trial is such that almost any outcome is preferable to going through trial.
Yeah. Yeah, welcome to the Brooklyn House of Pain. Word up, it's Little Shop of Horrors, Red Hook Projects, Murderville. It's cartoony and loony. See out here, you're not promised tomorrow. Ha, in this Little Shop of Horrors, that's how we get down. Yeah, enter, the projects on the prairie, scary. Greet you at the gate with Bloody Marys. Blood, a rail full of blood. Back to the cemetery, get more blood. Standing on the grave, drinking blood, smoking bones. We seen a crew of ghouls running by with stolen tombstones. With Hell's Angels on the chase. They lust to bust a black skull, want you embrace. They tie you up in chains and they stomp on your face. They go to purgatory and they beat the fucking case. I look around, mad bodies being buried in the ground. The devil's busy snatching souls by the pound. Another piece of meat lays dead in the street. Families in agony, cause brothers met their defeat. So welcome to the Brooklyn House of Pain, where you can gangbang and you be laying slain without a brain. Slaughterhouse on the hill like Cyprus, land of the snipers, overpopulated with vipers. This is the hell where the mad God dwells, where the people are intoxicated by evil smells. You can't trust the future, so don't make plans, cause everybody's trigger happy in this haunted house land. You're not promised tomorrow in this little shop of harvest. You're not promised tomorrow in this little shop of harvest. You're not promised tomorrow in this little shop of harvest. You're not promised tomorrow in this little shop of harvest. Today's forecast is a death storm, a fatal flood. A cloud sitting over the projects, raining blood. Mad souls drift away in a tornado. Babies being held by the hand that rocks the cradle. And all the dead start to rise with death in their eyes. Suddenly they hunt the one that took their lives. The walls of hell are closing in on all sides. You're trapped in the death square with 30-foot tides. Souls drift astray in the whirlpool spin. Ashes of a dead man blowing in the wind. Running for our lives, we seen Alice in chains. Sitting in the rocking chair, holding her own brain. A man lay slain in the rain. Rats nibble on his brain till the morgue truck came. Evil spirits delivering souls to the soul fire. Flesh decaying while laying in Maya. Trapped in the land of the lost, possessed by the cross. The holy force headed for Holocaust. Your religion's insanity, it's humanity, it kills. This place possessed by harmony, Amityville. That's why I'm trying to get out, cause you're not promised tomorrow. I'm spirit, straight out of the little shop of horrors. You're not promised tomorrow in this little shop of horrors. You're not promised tomorrow in this little shop of horrors. You're not promised tomorrow in this little shop of horrors. You're not promised tomorrow in this little shop of horrors. Ha, 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 yeah. So welcome to the Brooklyn House of Pain. You can gangbang, you can lay slain without a brain. So welcome to the Brooklyn House of Pain where you get
On January 12, 1975, Karen Campbell disappeared from the Wildwood Inn. 2 years later, Theodore Bundy was charged with that murder. Yet News 4 has uncovered police records that establish another Ted, a suspect with far more incriminating circumstantial evidence that connect him to the Campbell murder. Earlier that Saturday evening, Karen Campbell sat with her fiancé, Dr. Raymond Godowski, in front of a fire in the lobby of the Wildwood Inn. They had just finished dinner at a restaurant, the Stew Pot. Miss Campbell wanted a magazine from her room. About 8 o'clock in the evening, she caught the elevator to the lobby to the second floor. That was the last time Godowski saw her alive. On February the 17th, 36 days later, her nude body was found almost 3 miles away. Though the body was partially destroyed by animals, the coroner was able to establish by stomach analysis that Miss Campbell had died about 2 hours after the dinner at the Stew Pot on January the 12th. An investigation cleared the fiancé, but turned up what Pitkin County Sheriff's officers were to call a key suspect, a man we'll call Jones. The investigation was conducted by Detective Michael Fisher. He turned up the following profile on Jones. 1. Jones worked in the Aspen area at least 11 days prior to the Campbell murder, 1 day after. 2. He was employed as a maid and a dishwasher at 4 lodges in the general area. The Holiday Inn, 3 days. The Pomegranate Inn, 3 days. The Plum Tree Inn, 7 days. And the Top of the Village, 1 week. Point 3. In being fired from each job, employers testified Jones was, these are their words, disruptive, weird, a sexual deviant, athletic, physically attractive, hyperactive, scary, not playing with a full deck, crazier than hell, hostility to women. Officials in a report considered it significant also that one man had observed Jones drinking his own urine. This man said he was terrified of the man called Jones. The manager of the Top of the Village, Chris Haper, told investigators that on the 11th, the day before the Campbell disappearance, he had tried to fire Jones. Jones became aggressive, and Haper feared for his life. Haper said on the 12th, Jones left work at the Top of the Village to go watch cross-country skiers. The Top of the Village is 1 block away from the Wildwood Inn. A maid at the Wildwood Inn testified she saw Jones near the pool at the Wildwood on the night of the 12th. On the basis of this information, police brought Jones in for a polygraph test. The report finds no indication Jones committed this murder. But the report of this polygraph test also reveals that apparently an unusual situation occurred. Apparently, the test was administered without a blood pressure cuff. A Seattle polygraph expert, while not commenting on this specific test of Jones, takes a dim view of attaching validity to this manner of testing. If any one of these 3 elements were omitted, say, if you did not attach the blood pressure cuffs, would that give you an accurate reading?
Not necessarily, because we have to use all 3 components, and that's the important thing. And the good thing about polygraph is, as well as the breathing, we also have 2 other components to look at.
So if a test were administered, say, without the blood pressure cuffs, would you consider it a valid and accurate test?
Well, we just wouldn't do it. No, I don't think I would.
The agent in Colorado concluded that according to the polygraph, Jones did not commit the murder, and at this point, apparently, the investigation of this man was dropped. In October 1976, Ted Bundy was charged with the murder of Karen Campbell on the basis of a hair in his car found to be microscopically indistinguishable from the hair of Karen Campbell. But even the prosecution admits that the hair from thousands of other girls might also be microscopically indistinguishable from the hair found in Bundy's car.
Hair analysis is never what we call positive identification, like a fingerprint is. But it is circumstantial that it may have a great number of the same characteristics as others.
There is a postscript to this man, Jones. He was a resident in Seattle during the years 1974-1975.
On September the 8th, 1974, he was arrested by SPD, the Seattle Police Department, on a charge of indecent exposure. He served 180 days in jail here. Lieutenant, this is not public information, therefore the sheet is covered up, but can you verify for me that the man whose name I gave you served time in the jail on the dates I gave you?
Yes, I can verify that. He was in the dates you gave me. He was in the King County Jail.
This record indicates that?
This record does indicate that.
In a report to the FBI, the words of then Detective Sergeant Ivan Beeson, quote, "In checking records, the Seattle area was having almost one missing girl per month, but after the suspect, Jones, was incarcerated, the missing girls stopped. In the opinion of the reporting detective, Jones looks good as a suspect," end quote. The missing girls referred to in this report were the 8 young women associated with a mysterious Ted. Jones lived 2 blocks from the alley where Georgiana Hawkins disappeared. Jones lived within 2 blocks from where Linda Ann Healy disappeared. Someone must know where Jones is today. None of the law enforcement officers I questioned in Utah, Colorado, and Washington do. For all intents and purposes, the suspect Jones has disappeared. This is Ruth Walsh, Aspen, Colorado, for News 4. Theodore Bundy is accused of certain crimes. He is suspected in others. The major thrust of the prosecution's case will be circumstantial evidence, evidence they say links Theodore Bundy to these crimes. It is a difficult way to prosecute a case. In our investigation, 7 men have turned up that on the surface would seem to have uncanny circumstantial connections with all or some of the crimes publicly associated with Ted Bundy. We'll look at 3 of them. Take, for instance, Suspect 1, a man currently standing trial for multiple murders. He has been diagnosed as schizophrenic. There are strong indications that he was in Utah and Colorado during the time of the crimes there. You will recall that Bundy has been convicted of kidnapping Carol Daronch in a suburb of Salt Lake City. Daronch was approached that night by a man posing as an Officer Roslin, showed a badge as identification, and later abducted her with handcuffs. Hear now the words of a man who worked with Suspect 1.
You just don't find too many people that keep badges and handcuffs in their briefcases. They always wanted to be a policeman. And the shield that he had, I can't, I saw it, but it looked real. But like I said, he was such a deluded person anyway that most of everything he said or did, you could take, I took with a grain of salt.
We now move to Suspect 2, a man convicted of the murder of Salt Lake City woman Karen Roberson. Suspect 2 is currently serving time for this murder. He moved to Salt Lake City in early 1976. A month later, a series of murders occurred: Sandra Weaver, Carol Sarkazians, Kathy Hansen, Karen Roberson. In the Roberson murder, Suspect 2 used handcuffs and a handgun. The coroner said it's possible one man committed all these murders. We move now to Suspect 3, a man whose mother, stepsister, and stepbrother felt could be the King County Ted, the Ted that police are looking for in the abduction and murder of 8 young women in this area. The mother of Suspect 3 recalls that her son was away from home on the days the 8 women disappeared and was in the location of each of the 8 women when they disappeared. Suspect 3 had a removable arm cast which protected an old injury. The man who abducted 2 women at Lake Sammamish was seen wearing an arm cast. Suspect 3 is described by his mother and stepbrother as being mentally unbalanced when he returned from Vietnam. He seemed to get pleasure from showing photographs of atrocities he committed in Vietnam. One picture, as verified by the family, shows him with the heads of 2 Vietnamese he had decapitated. The remains of 4 of the missing 8 women in the King County area were found on Taylor Mountain. Suspect 3 hunted frequently on Taylor Mountain and knew the area well. I talked to the stepbrother about contacting the King County Police. What is the one thing you would tell them that you feel should make them investigate him further?
The description, I think, and the fact that he lived in the area at the time, beings. I think the description would be the major thing, plus the fact that he had came up on their computer and they didn't really do much about it because they did have a suspect, and that's my own opinion. So I think they should have done more about it at the time, but they didn't. The description, I think, is probably the best.
The cast?
Yes. The fact that he had that cast, and it was a matter of public record. You could have gone to any medical supply outfit and asked them. They would have had a record.
None of those three is Theodore Bundy. It's interesting to see how quickly an incriminating circumstantial case can be built up around someone. We have turned up other men. One of them in particular stands out because of his strong circumstantial connection with not only the Karen Campbell murder in Colorado, but with the King County disappearances as well. Tomorrow we'll take a look at this man, Suspect 4. I'm Ruth Walsh for News 4.
Shortly after 7 o'clock on the evening of November the 8th, 1974, Carol Daronch parked her car in this parking lot at the Fashion Mall. Shortly after began what she now calls her personal nightmare. This is her story as she related it to police. Around 7 p.m., she parked her car in the west lot near Sears, went inside. While in the mall, Miss Daronch met some cousins, stopped to talk for a while, then walked back towards Sears. She was approached by a man near Walden's bookstore. This man identified himself as Officer Roslin, who said he had caught a suspect breaking into her car. He asked Miss Daronch to come out to the car to check it. For the next few minutes, they walked a winding route through the mall, outside and across the street to a laundromat. The man told Miss Daronch this was the Murray Police substation, but the suspect had been moved. He said they would have to go down to the main Murray Police Department to sign a complaint. Daronch entered the abductor's car. While on the way to the police station, she asked for identification and was shown a badge. The abductor at this point drove to and pulled into the back parking lot of McMillan Elementary School. The man slapped handcuffs on her right wrist. Daronch struggled. The man pulled a pistol. She jumped out of the car. The man jumped out, waving what looked like a crowbar. She broke loose, ran to the street, flagged down a passing car, and an elderly couple drove Daronch to the Murray Police Station. The search for her abductor began. The Bundy defense maintained throughout the trial that there were, quote, gaping errors, end quote, in the testimony of Carol Daronch. The first in the question of identification.
And it was only a very, very short period of time when it became clear to her what was happening, that she had any reason to be afraid. And at that point, she was so fearful and frightened that she probably couldn't, her senses weren't treating her very well at that point.
Then how could 9 months later she make a positive identification of Ted Bundy?
I don't know. I don't think it's possible. I think that's asking too much of people to do, and we have our theories as to how it happened and why she did make an identification, but I don't conclude that it was because she got a good look at her abductor and was able to remember him. I don't think that happened.
11 months later, however, at the trial, Daronch picked out Bundy as her abductor. The second point concerns the abductor's car. During questioning in 1974, she described a white or light blue Volkswagen automobile with a large tear on the back seat. During the trial, she identified the picture of a brown Volkswagen. It was also established in the trial that Bundy's car did not have a tear on the back seat. The third point involves the badge shown her by the abductor. Daronch, at different times, gave 4 different descriptions of this badge. The fourth point, police lineup, which included Ted Bundy, was held on September 5th, 1975. On 2 occasions, just 1 day before and 3 days prior to this lineup, Miss Daronch saw pictures of Ted Bundy and testified later that she could have picked him out of the lineup based on those photographs. This is key, according to the defense, because Bundy was convicted of abducting Carol Daronch based on her ability to pick him out of that police lineup. This conviction was recently upheld by the U.S. Supreme Court, and as far as the prosecutor, David Yoakum, is concerned, Bundy is the guilty party.
There's no doubt in my mind, and of course the court so found, that there was no reasonable doubt with regard to his guilt. He's an individual that it's probably impossible to describe. I've talked to a lot of psychiatrists and psychologists that studied him while he was at the state prison, even before he was sentenced to the prison, and read all their reports. I've probably read everything that anyone's ever said about Ted, and I think he's just an individual that is impossible to describe. What motivates him, what causes this, what I think is very deviant behavior, I don't think medical science will ever find out until he opens up his own mind and talks finally about what he has done and what he is responsible for.
I think he's innocent of the things he's accused of around here, and I don't know how he was able to put up with it as long as he did. And I visited him in Colorado and saw the jail there and so on. I don't know how he stayed there as long as he did either.
Ted Bundy was arrested in Salt Lake City August 16, 1975, and charged with possession of burglary tools and evading an officer. He was arrested by Sergeant Bob Hayward of the Utah State Patrol. 6 weeks before that, Salt Lake City detectives had, in their words, focused in on Bundy after King County authorities notified them Bundy was in Utah. Ted Bundy was convicted in October 1975 with kidnapping Carol Daronch. It was almost 1 year after the incident occurred. Almost 1 year after the conviction, the Bundy defense located in a locked cabinet what they said was a suppressed report, a report filed by a detective, Jerry Thompson, in which he says, quote, "This is a poor witness in the detective's opinion. I don't know if she could identify who abducted her." The defense claims this proves that police engineered the identification of Bundy, but Detective Thompson says he simply didn't think this report on Carol Daronch was important, that he never intended to suppress that report. Well, what about Miss Daronch now?
She doesn't talk about it much anymore. I'm sure it's still in the back of her mind, but I see her every now and then. I see her in the shopping centers and so forth in town and talk to her, and you can tell it's on her mind. I mean, when she runs into us guys, you can tell she wants to talk about it, but then she doesn't.
Murray, Utah is a suburb of Salt Lake City, where Miss Daronch was abducted and where she still lives. Although the Murray police officers took me to her home, they didn't want us questioning her. They want the news media to let her get on with her life and forget the trauma of 1974. It was a moot point. Miss Daronch was not at home. Ted Bundy's association with Salt Lake City hasn't ended by any stretch of the imagination. He still owes the state of Utah 15 years in the Carol Daronch conviction, and prosecutor David Yoakum told me he intends to get those 15 years, even if Ted is found innocent of all other charges. I'm Ruth Walsh in Salt Lake City for News 4. From January to July of 1974, the King County area was engulfed in a wave of fear as young women were being attacked and murdered with alarming regularity. Police in the area announced to the news media that a pattern seemed to be emerging: similar appearance, age, circumstances surrounding disappearances. The furor culminated on July the 14th, 1974, when police had their first break. On that day, 2 young women, Janice Ott, Denise Naslin, had vanished from Lake Sammamish. There were witnesses who saw a man calling himself Ted, wearing a cast on his left arm, walking away with Miss Ott. She was wheeling a yellow bicycle. The women were never seen again alive. The bike has never been found. A composite picture was released to the news media. The Ted was seen with a light brown Volkswagen. He was described as 5'7" to 5'8", neck-length hair, brown to light brown, dark tan, 160 pounds, cast on the left arm. After this picture appeared, the task force leader, Captain Nick Mackey, received one call among thousands of others. This particular caller said a man named Ted Bundy looked, quote, something like the picture and had a brown Volkswagen. At that moment, Bundy joined a growing list of almost 3,000 men under investigation. It wasn't until October 1975 that these pictures and headlines appeared. Bundy had been charged with kidnapping a woman named Carol Daronch in Salt Lake City, and at that point, King County police took a more active interest in him.
But from that moment on, Captain Mackey kept insisting to reporters that Ted Bundy was not a prime suspect.
The media are the ones that are making him the prime suspect. We are not. We have quite a few people that look very good, and it's surprising. You get onto one person, and people tend to make their suspect fit all the aspects of Ted. But we can't work on one at a time. We've got quite a few at a time, and they all look just right down the line until we finally come to a point where they're totally eliminated.
The photograph of Ted Bundy was shown to at least 8 witnesses from Lake Sammamish. 7 positively said Ted Bundy was not the mysterious Ted. 1 said he looked something like the man. Almost a year later, the 7 witnesses were again shown a Bundy picture. Again, they said no. By now, Bundy's photograph and composite rendering were being shown routinely in juxtaposition, a fact that Ted Bundy says is the point where he was condemned. The skeletal remains of Ott and Naslin were found 3 miles from Issaquah on September the 7th, 1974. The skeletal remains of 4 other women, Healy, Rancourt, Parks, and Ball, were found on Taylor Mountain, near Issaquah, the next March, 1975. Where does this investigation now stand? Well, King County police officials will not and cannot discuss this King County investigation because it is still an active case. No one will or can confirm that the investigation continues on other suspects. Officials in the King County area are very interested in this Florida trial. If they don't actually fly to Miami to take part in the trial or to listen to it, they will keep in contact with what they call the TED Club. That's a group of law enforcement officials from 4 or 5 states banded together to share information about Theodore Bundy. I'm Ruth Walsh in Miami for News 4. The legal rule of evidence called similar transaction is going to play a key role in this Florida trial as it did in the Salt Lake City trial.
The basic rule of law in the United States is that prior bad acts, whether they're convictions or not, are not admissible to prove that a person has done something in the present. That's the law. There's one exception to that, or there are a few exceptions to that, but the exception that you're talking about is what we call common scheme or plan. And that's an exception, and being an exception, the prosecution has to jump through a number of hoops before they're allowed to use that sort of evidence. The first thing they have to do is prove that there is indeed a common scheme or plan, that something that happened in the past is somehow related to what happened in the present. And I think that's clearly a very large hurdle as far as Ted's cases are concerned. Assuming that can be proven, that there is a common scheme or plan, then they have to prove that it is somehow relevant to the present charges.
It's difficult to prove. It's not acceptable courtroom procedure in some states, and it's difficult to control.
A case in point is the Colorado murder of Karen Campbell, for which Ted Bundy has been charged. We flew to Colorado Springs to talk to the Colorado prosecutors. Bob Russell and Milton Blakey told me they asked to bring similar transaction evidence of 4 Utah crimes into Colorado court. One of the 4 cases, that of Carol Daronch. The other 3, the disappearance of Deborah Kent and the murders of Melissa Smith and Laura Amy. Bundy has never been charged with the crimes of Kent, Smith, and Amy, and that fact alone made the legal rule of evidence of similar transaction peculiar, according to Bundy's defense attorney. But when I went to Salt Lake City and Murray, Utah, to talk to officials, they didn't try to hide from me the fact that they think all 4 crimes are related, although this hasn't been admitted publicly before.
Well, I think that all of the, quote, Ted cases that are still open, obviously. We're talking about Melissa Smith, who disappeared in 1974, and whose body was found up the canyon, and Laura Amy, a girl in Utah County, who was also found missing around the same time, and her body was discovered down in American Fork Canyon. And of course the Debbie Kent disappearance up in Davis County, adjoining county, whose body's never been found. These have all been linked in some way to Ted, either by physical evidence or witnesses' testimony, and they were, I assume that all the jurisdictions still have those cases open, but they pretty well centered on Ted as the main suspect.
Bundy and his attorneys called appalling the move to have similar transaction brought to the Karen Campbell case in Colorado.
Here were all these cases that I was immediately linked with, allegedly, in Colorado. But it turns out that most of those cases that involved young women who were beaten to death and left nude in the mountains of Colorado occurred before I even left Washington State. They happened before and they happened after I was ever in Colorado. So I think that what we have here is tunnel vision. Even here in Tallahassee, there was a crime in the Tallahassee area that occurred in May of '75 that's identical to what happened in the Chi-Omega house. In fact, it involved the Chi-Omega sister. In May of '75, I was in Glenwood Springs. So what I'm saying is that we're really looking at this thing in a very prejudicial way. I mean, not we, you, or the general public is.
They claimed Prosecutor Russell was using the headlines of this unusual rule of evidence to further Russell's political career. Defense said Russell wanted to be district attorney, a job he did run for and now holds. The prosecutor claims the similarities include abduction, nude bodies, severely beaten, little blood found in those bodies, Smith and Amy wearing only necklaces. The defense claimed more things were dissimilar. The investigating authorities established that both Amy and Smith had been held captive for a period of days and weeks before being killed. Karen Campbell, on the other hand, was killed within 2 hours of her abduction. The defense further notes that to keep the women captive would have meant Bundy needed an accomplice because Bundy has a firm alibi during those captive dates. He was on a hunting trip with his fiance's father. Neighbors of Bundy, when he lived in this apartment, also testified there were no indications that anyone was being held captive or living with Bundy during this time. Colorado and Utah authorities now add the names of Sandra Weaver, Kathy Hansen, Carolyn Sarkazians, Karen Roberson to their growing list of missing and murdered women. A coroner's report concludes that it is possible the same person or persons killed these women. At this point in our investigation, an interesting coincidence is documented. Another man was convicted of the murder of Karen Roberson and is currently serving time. He used abduction, handcuffs, and a handgun. It is believed this man was briefly investigated in the Carol Daronch case, in which abduction, handcuffs, and a handgun were used. The files on these cases have not been closed in Utah.
It's almost certain that the legal question of similar transaction will play a key role in this Florida trial, and if it does, one Seattle lawyer speculates it will be like opening a legal can of worms. It could be the basis of appeal, should that become necessary. Ruth Walsh for News 4. With pretrial motions getting underway, the state of Florida is going to officially begin testing its case against Theodore Robert Bundy, defendant described by some Miami residents as crazed and warped, by others as cool-headed and engaging. The jury of his peers selected by Mr. Bundy is a diversified lot.
I think we have a jury. Swear the jury, Madam Clerk. All jurors, please stand and raise your right hand.
The jury is predominantly male, predominantly black, and has convinced the defense of a collective lack of knowledge about the case. Rudolph Trimmel, in the glasses in the back row, is a senior project engineer for Texaco. He moved to South Florida just a short time ago and is the likely choice for jury foreman. Trimmel reads the Wall Street Journal, plays tennis, and is a political independent. Ted Bundy is pleased with this jury.
I don't think anybody would say that jury is completely unbiased, but I think overall the jury is much less biased than what we would have seen in Tallahassee, and much better than what we hoped for in Miami, and he's pleased. It's not the perfect jury, but he's pleased.
Ruth Hamilton, in the glasses in the front row, is a maid at Homestead Air Force Base, is 61, and is in the habit of peering at Bundy over those thick glasses. Estelle Suarez, sitting next to her, is the only Latin on the jury, a bookkeeper with 2 children. She reads about grocery store prices when she reads the newspapers. Alan Smith, the man in the next seat, is an artist, the first juror selected. He has 4 children and says he's not clear in his mind about the death penalty. But Vernon Swindle, the black man sitting behind Smith, says he is for the death penalty.
To me, the issue of death penalty was not so terribly important as a person's apparent ability to absorb a lot of information, a lot of detail, a person who had the personal strength to stick to that person's own evaluation or opinions, that sort of thing.
The remaining 6 jurors are comprised of 2 widows, a retired school principal, a school teacher, a grandfather, and a maintenance engineer. Emerging as the dominant figure in this trial is the judge, Edward Cowart, who is proving that he has a commitment to a fair judicial proceeding, and he has a sense of humor. But he's been stern with the media, at times impatient with all the lawyers. He should maintain his tight control over this trial, as he has shown today. Ruth Walsh, in Miami, for News 4.
Nita, do you see the man that you saw at the door of the Calmega house on January 15, 1978, the courtroom today?
Yes, I believe I do. This is the first time that I've seen him in life, exact profile as I had seen it that night. And I think I recognize it now better than I ever have before.
It was the most dramatic moment of the court proceedings so far, an upsetting moment for the defense as they try to get this witness excused, an important moment for the prosecution, which needs this only eyewitness account in order to strengthen the case against Ted Bundy. Yet within the next hour, Nita Neary appeared to have lost some of her credibility. She demonstrated for the court the position of the intruder as she saw him. The blonde-haired man with his back to the camera is Bob Haggard. He's standing in the position of Neary that night. Nita is now standing, as you see her, in the position of the man she saw. As you can see, her profile is not visible. The source for the defense says they can't clearly judge Cowart's reaction to this testimony. He will make the decision that, in one sense, could affect the outcome of the trial, whether to allow Nita to testify before the jury. At one point, he seemed to have made up his mind.
Positiveness is what bothers the court. The witness's statement of I believe, I think we've expended the concept of identification. The certainty of it is what's going to preclude jury consideration possibly unless there's some further something shown to the court.
Nita Neary displayed many moods in court during the intense cross-examination, at times calm and tense, sometimes looking very tired, and in others, the exasperation of answering the same questions over and over, clearly showing on her face. There's no doubt that this has been a long ordeal for Nita Neary, and it isn't over. The defense still has to call their witnesses. I'm Ruth Walsh in Miami for News 4.
Satellite. You can see her in the screen behind me. She has an update on what's happening in the Ted Bundy trial. Ruth, what is going on?
Bob, it's kind of interesting what's going on right now. As you can see, I'm standing in an empty courtroom with Judge Edward Cowart's permission. This afternoon, in this courtroom, he gave his instructions to the jury, told them what its duties was in this murder trial, and excused them to the jury room. They're in there right now, and we're all waiting. The waiting begins. It is a 7-count indictment. 3 counts burglary and assault, 3 counts attempted murder, 2 counts murder. Jury members have been instructed that they must rule on each of these counts and can only find Ted Bundy guilty if they can do so beyond any reasonable doubt.
If you cannot reconcile any conflicts you find, then it is your duty to reject the evidence you find to be unworthy of belief and to accept and rely upon the evidence that you find worthy of belief.
The lawyers for both sides hope that all jurors heard all the closing arguments, but it is only the educated observer who can tell if Ruth Hamilton is sleeping or observing. She has done both during the course of this trial and has given the proceedings a few needed chuckles during the past 4 weeks. But today the task turns serious. The defendant waits now in his cell. His mother and friends wait in a quiet hotel room. The lawyers wait. The media waits. The jury deliberates.
As a good, loving, fine young man.
Are you confident that he will be acquitted here?
I hope he will be acquitted. I can't say I'm confident, but I believe he should be on the basis of the non-evidence.
Speaking of that evidence, just a few minutes ago up in the media room, something rather unprecedented occurred. Ted Bundy had agreed to do an interview with me over the telephone. He called me while we were talking on this interview. In this courtroom, Judge Edward Cowart came in to answer some questions that the jurors had. We were able to relay to Bundy what the judge was saying.
Ted, it doesn't appear to be anything significant at this point. Wyatt, what is happening right now?
The jury has asked a question about testimony, certain evidence from police.
The jury has asked a question, Ted, about some testimony, and the judge is going to provide that. About
Deputy Marianne Kirkham.
About Deputy Marianne Kirkham. Do you have any idea what that's about?
Marianne Kirkham, I have. Oh, yes, indeed. Well, that could be with regard to... Marianne Kirkham was the crime scene technician who processed the Dunwoody crime scene, and she was responsible, 1, for collecting the linen from Cheryl Thomas's bed, and 2, for collecting the pantyhose mask. And she also stretched it out on the floor to take a photograph of the mask. Our contention has been that possibly the hair found on the mask was picked up off the floor. And then a few minutes ago I talked to one of my attorneys, and he was telling me what the jury was doing, which is, from what we can tell, very little. And I started to get a little bit edgy. I said, well, why aren't they looking at exhibits? And how late are they going to go? Someone said that Judge Cowart had predicted they'll be back tonight. I wanted to know why he thought that was going to be the case, and so on and so forth. So I just said, I just decided to put it out of my mind, and I'll tell you what, whatever happens, I'm ready for it.
Are you prepared for a guilty verdict?
Sure thing. I mean, yes, I am, believe it or not. In a way, I just want to get this over so I can catch up on my sleep, and that may sound kind of funny, but the pressure of being in trial is such that almost any outcome is preferable to going through trial.
Bob, that's the way it's been today. It's been a day of excitement, exclusive interviews, and a day of waiting. We are right now waiting to see what's going to happen.
Have any idea at this point, Ruth, just how long we're going to have to wait?
That's the million-dollar question, how long we're going to have to wait. Just a few minutes ago, I asked the bailiff in the courtroom how long he thought it was going to be. He said, only the man upstairs knows that. I can't give you an answer. It could be 1 hour. It could be 5 days.
Okay, Ruth, thank you. We know you'll be waiting. We'll hear immediately as anything happens.
You will.
Okay.